A too late Earth care imperative, a wealth gap, the stuff of Karl Marx's worst nightmare, and a steady careening forward the status quo unperturbed. In the midst of all that, what's the purpose of education? Is it working? Today I'm with my friend and colleague Nico Giles. Hear Nico's journey of self-discovery and reflection, as well as our mutual musings about where exactly we are in our collective journey.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Nicholas Wiggins. I also go by Nico Giles. Giles is my middle name. It's a childhood name I've had my whole life, and started to kind of adopt in the last few years as a search for authenticity in myself, which we can get into. But I am a film producer. I got into film about 4 years ago. Pretty specifically about 4 years ago, but I had kind of always just dabbled in storytelling and certain different types of digital technology for a few years. I started my career in education, worked in higher ed, worked in K through 12, worked on the philanthropy side, and really just kind of got a grasp of what education was as a profession. And in wanting to be more intentional about the stories I was telling at the time through education, really began to expand to include a lot of things outside of education. You know, what we could call in this conversation issues of social justice, education being a really big one. And and it just kind of spiraled from there. So then I left the field of education and kind of more cemented myself in the field of film. And I've been doing that for about 4 years now, and I now live in Los Angeles.
Is there like I wanted to say like the big LA, which sounds really stupid. Is there, La La Land? That's the,
La La
that,
Land.
that
La
is
La, La Land, Tinseltown.
Tinseltown. I was like, what are the nicknames for LA? So I feel like people should know. It's just fair to let them know. We went to high school together.
Mm-hmm.
We also went to college together.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't like super close in high school or college, but we do have
Mm-hmm.
that shared background.
Absolutely.
Um, you there's no getting around it. So listeners, we talked about what we're going to talk about, and Nico had a really interesting topic for today, which I thought was great. What's the purpose of education as you see it and as you reflect on it? Give us your thoughts.
So the work and the best entry point, I think, is actually, so this entry point happened where I realized my subconscious began to move into my conscious, and I began to rethink these things. But I didn't become fully conscious about this until years later. So then it was, of course, they say hindsight is 2020. It was one of those things where I looked back on whenever my thinking began to actually change. And it took about 2 years to catch up for my action to actually change, because I was so ingrained in the way you do things, and my own personal ego and decision to try and get along and be liked and do what I thought would make me successful kept me on this path and all these things. But to get real specific, so after I graduated from Kansas State University, where we both went to school, I decided to start a youth agency. It just was really compelling on my heart. I'm not sure what led me down that, but as a story for another day. But I decided to start this youth agency. And 2 years into building that agency, we were running, several different programs a week. Again, I could get into all the details about that, but several different youth development programs a week. And we had an advisory board, and there were two deans from K-State that were on that advisory board of our foundation, of our agency, one of which was a dean at the College of Education at K-State. And he said, hey, I've seen what you've done for 2 years, really with nothing. You've went out and raised money. You've built a board. You've built a program. Why don't you come work for us, K-State, the College of Education? You'll have more resources. You'll have more influence. You'll be more proximal to change that you want to create, and do this with us. And so I at that point, this is what I now consider or call the institution. I brought this up on our last time together, but
Yeah, we were on a like a panel together
yes,
recently.
yes,
Yeah.
on a panel discussing the film that we worked on together. So I went into the institution, and that's what I'm saying, where it took me about 2 years working with the institution for my awareness to catch up to my actual experiences. And so,
Hmm.
I say all of this with so much respect and gratitude and appreciation for the people that have given me opportunities, for the people that have stood up for me and supported me, for the people that are fighting for equity and justice. I say all of this with those things in mind, but I also want to be authentic and be honest and be vulnerable about my experiences. So, to make a long story short, I was asked to, my job, what I was recruited to do was to build a Black male teacher scholarship program for the College of Education at Kansas State University. And as a roadmap, as an example, as a how to accomplish this, they flew me down to South Carolina to observe a program. I'll leave these programs unnamed, but to observe a program that was executing and operating efficiently, and then to bring that back to Kansas State University and to implement that program. Mind you, we went to the South. We went to South Carolina, or yeah, I think South Carolina, and witnessed, in a very rural, Black, Southern, segregated, historically racist uh, area, neighborhood, community, and tried to squeeze all that value and bring it back to middle of nowhere, you know.
Wait, the value being like this, the efficiency of the like a teacher prep program or something?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I guess it's important to include more details to understand why this is so important. So the name of the program is Call Me Mister. And
The program you created.
the program that I essentially licensed, for lack of a better word.
Oh, okay.
So
Got it.
so it was operating in about maybe 5 or 6 states in the South, between Florida and maybe West Virginia and South Carolina, and I think it was kind of maybe trickling into Georgia, right? And what how it was operating was, there was a PWI that was serving as the operational head,
Well,
and
what's PWI?
predominantly white institution.
Oh, it's the opposite of like HBCU.
Yes. So they were serving as the operational head, and they dispersed all of the funding and the resources to the HBCUs to recruit Black men to become educators. So the Black men were being educated inside of these HBCUs to become teachers, to go back into their environments, to be effective role models for the young Black men that are coming up through our formal education system. The PWIs served as the operational head to execute this program, but the cultural hub of this experience took place at the HBCUs. So it's a very, very interesting model. So
Yeah, I feel like I got feelings. I'm curious what your feelings of that, because it gives me feelings like what, why, or what, like, yeah.
how it unfolded that way, right? That so that intention, right, especially with it being in the South and what the South has meant to America, especially Black Americans since its founding, and the intention of cultivating young Black men to become effective role models in their very local, proximal neighborhood environments, to help lead young Black men going through our formal education system. All that value was tried to be squeezed into, a ball and taken to K-State and kind of just dropped down, and the expectation that same value would unfold. And I know that things take time. I know that that there's a process to everything, but that intention was not kept. What actually happened, or my experience looking back on it these years later, was a predominantly white institution like Kansas State University in a predominantly white college of education said, we need to diversify this college. How can we diversify this college?
Mm.
There's this program. It's predominantly in the South. They recruit Black men to become teachers. Why don't we take this program, and instead of just recruiting Black men, why don't we change it to be men of color, and use this as a tool, as a vehicle to recruit more men of color to become teachers.
Mm.
So
it's like I'm hearing something kind of tough already, which is that there's almost like an ulterior motive, or like a conflicting motive at the very least, that like
right,
commodifying
right,
people of color, students of color, for the benefit of your program,
right.
with this
Yes,
theoretically,
and
ostensibly altruistic program.
exactly, and that's a great way to put that, because to our earlier point of the institution, the structure, I think people get into it or get invested into it, and they intend and they mean to do the right thing. But because the state-funded education system is built on top of a nation who's so focused on commodifying everything, and so focused on squeezing the highest capitalistic value out of everything, it's so hard to retain the true value and intent of something, because there is this almost unconscious need to commodify things to survive in this country. That's just, that college of education was trying to quote unquote survive. They were trying to figure out, how do we commodify more of our experience as a college so that we can bring in more money, so that we can continue to be sustainable. And so that was my first experience of working in education, was these really high points of, I get to do this thing, and I have a job as a professional, and I'm recruiting Black men to become teachers, and
you were recruited for it, like, because of your own efforts. Yes, that's an honor.
Yeah, I was seen as someone that was valuable. Then I got to go to South Carolina and see 200 plus Black male educators at this conference, and then to come back to K-State and begin, this very, what would then be a few years of this very serious work of equity in higher education, and really trying to understand what that equitable process would be. That led me to then helping to establish. So I did that work at the College of Education for a year or two through grad school, and that led me to start and help build the university-wide Black male retention and graduation program. So I first came in and focused on the College of Education. We then established a university-wide Black male retention and graduation program called MOTEP, which was focused on retention, graduation, and placement for Black males at K-State.
Placement at, like, within or afterwards?
Placement, like they leave with a job, they leave with an internship, they leave with something of value,
And you said the name was Imhotep, like one of the, it's an Egyptian god, yeah?
Yeah. The Egyptian polymath. Yep, named after the first Egyptian polymath. So,
nice.
So that was kind of my, indoctrination into who, not, a lot of things, man. The institution of education, and I brought this up in our previous conversation. I'm sure a lot of these things I brought up, that was also a really strong indoctrination for me, that people of color, particularly Black people, are always painted through the lens of struggle and a lack thereof. And so we need to quote unquote help these people. Let's give our, abusive, exhaustive, non-regenerative resources to these people, and that will make them better.
But you're talking about philanthropy there. You're talking about, like, the whole structure of charity as an institution.
Yeah. It's like, let's pass on our struggle disguised as joy, and be confused why other people don't find joy in it. So it was my indoctrination into what these institutions of education are. And there were so many things that happened in that I kind of left out, but it was also my own personal kind of indoctrination into who I'm supposed to be as a Black man in this system.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's really when I started focusing on storytelling as a way to um, my best way to combat um, the systems that I was partaking in that I couldn't directly combat so quickly. Institutions. I had this professor at K-State, and he used to always say the slow turning wheel of academia. It's just this very slow, nothing happens quickly. So storytelling and film initially was an outlet and a way to tell stories really quickly and trying to make change, and then kind of ran with it from there. But yeah, I hope I explained that well, but that was my first 3 or 4 year experience of working in the institution.
And you said that your awareness kind of has caught up with your experience, and then there was kind of a 2 year lag. So help me bring that in. So you're kind of reflecting on that.
So once it hit me, I left. Once it hit me, I left K-State. And I went to so I was recruiting these kids from the urban core, predominantly from Kansas City, right? Kansas City, Wichita, Topeka, if you're from Topeka, but these urban cores in the state of Kansas. Once I decided that I was going to leave, I was like, I'm going to go back home to Kansas City and kind of go instead of recruiting, because most of these kids, even you and I, probably when we leave for college, we don't even know why we're going. It's just what we're supposed to do. We're told this is what's best for us. It's tended to work out for other people. This is such a classic, narrative now that our generation has picked a battle with. So I went back to the urban core to work directly with these kids and work in the schools. And I worked in Wyandotte County for a few years after that. And I was like hell bent on, rebellion at that point, like, cooperative rebellion. I wasn't there to I wasn't trying to be, to blow the whole thing up. I still wanted to be of value and be of support and be a quote unquote team player in those ways. But certainly my goal was to teach independence really, really soon, because one of the biggest reasons why I left K-State was because once we finally got a hold of the data that we were working to aggregate through this Black Male Initiative, we were finding out less than 25% of the Black males who went to K-State actually graduated.
Wow.
So less than a quarter. So it's like if 75% of these kids aren't even leaving with a degree, why are they going in the first place?
Wow.
And to just challenge that assumption and that notion.
I have a real-time data I want to throw in there. So that's compared to like about half of all students overall, regardless of race, who start college, finish within 6 years. So half of so 25% is
even that. I think what K-State's is like 70 something, but you're saying across the country.
Yeah, and so K-State as a whole, it's higher.
Yeah,
but for Black men at K-State, it's
like 25%,
way lower.
One in four, right? So with that, I'm like, okay, I need to leave here. That was the conclusion I came to at the time. So went home to Kansas City and said, okay, started really challenging these kids as seniors or who I would meet, like, I want to go up to college, and it's like, kind of presented them with the truth. And what I realized is that even so, then is in KCK, for example, I think the average between the schools, it's been a few years since I looked at the data. Some schools were in the high 60s, some schools were in the low 70s graduation rate at these schools. So let's just say 70%. 70% of those kids. So 30% aren't graduating high school. Out of those 70% that graduate, whatever percent go off to college. Out of that percent, only a quarter of those graduate from college.
Wow.
So it was just like, I guess my goal and my focus really was like, how do I operate inside the institution yet teach particularly young people of color the skills that they need to survive and live, especially the kids who were, with 3-4 months, this was the end of the road for their quote unquote formal education. They were going to drop out. So that pushed me into entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurship. And I did that for 2 or 3 years, and I can get into detail on that. I don't want to derail, but um, opened up a coffee shop. We were selling hundreds of dollars of coffee every week. Um, Selling
At the
coffee
school?
at the school. Yeah, we had. I had set up a first period class with a group of kids, and we had like 7 or 8 coffee pots, and I funded their operation, and they were slinging coffee. Fridays was donuts, and just really started teaching them entrepreneurship. Uh, you know, and that was like it was one of those things I accidentally stumbled upon. Coffee at 7 a.m. in a school is like cracking a crack house. It was such a high demand.
Yeah, yeah. Man,
Uh, but yeah, it
I
was the point. Sorry, the point there was like it was just that trying to get closer and closer and closer to like I guess the honest thing is like we go through this whole formal system of education all the way through high school, through college, some of us through grad school. Most of the time, I believe, is because we believe that is our best chance at survival. I don't even know if we're thinking about thriving, but certainly we're like, I won't amount to anything in life if I don't get a college degree. I certainly am going to be living out of a dumpster if I don't graduate from high school, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's the driving, fear, I hate to be driven by fear, but for the sake, if that's the driving fear, well, let's just focus on, that piece, the survival piece. And then from there, if you feel more grounded in the fact that you can survive, maybe you'll make healthier and better choices. Maybe you'll question the intentions people place on you, like saying, hey, come to school with us, you'll survive, you'll be better off. And just that was really how I tried to take the experiences and work with the institution, yet teach really strong fundamental independent skills. um,
it seemed like you kept kind of going, like when you left K-State, you were kind of going back to the root in a way,
mm,
like you're realizing there are all these people who slipped through the cracks,
mm-hmm.
and by going younger, you're trying to catch those people before it's too late in a way.
Yeah, and then it's like, man, so you realize each year is too old, each now
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of, I don't want to get too far off the point, but I'm going through so much healing myself, and I'm in trauma therapy, and a big part of that is um, looking at your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing a lot of research now and understanding what happens in the development, the first 7 years of a child's mind as he's developing, and that's really pinpointed how critically important early childhood education is, and early caretakers. And so it's just like, it just keeps going younger and younger, I guess, where it's like, the whole thing is super important, the whole lifespan. But
Makes me very glad that I'm not a parent.
each year of growth is a year less opportunity to traumatize my child. I guess I don't know if that's a bad way to look at it.
No, I hear that. Yeah, you gotta like, yeah, you're maturing so you can pass on less of your trauma. Totally.
You can pass on less of it, because interesting twist too is that I was reading in this book. It's called What Happened to You, and it's essentially focusing on this idea. When we see like a child acting crazy, we always say, what's wrong with you, instead of
Mm,
saying what happened to you,
mm.
because a child who is acting in those ways, something happened to them. There's nothing wrong with them, something happened to them. So it's changing that paradigm. But it was saying that birth is the first traumatic experience a child
Yeah,
experience.
that's some serious, is that Jungian or is that Freudian?
I don't know.
One of those two philosophers, like they talk about that.
Oh, do they? That
Yeah,
childbirth is traumatic?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure, you've been, since the beginning of your existence
You're
in this ninth.
warm and comfy.
And then next thing you know, this abrupt experience happens.
Man, the trauma of the first breath. So we teed
Sorry,
up
I
that we
took
are going to
this on
talk
a
about the
tangent.
purpose of education.
Yes.
Is the purpose of education survival? Is it meant to be a, or maybe not talk about what it's meant to be, but is it function as, like, functionally, essentially, like, is education at all levels just like about allowing people to
Well,
survive?
what's so interesting is, and this is just my own reflection, so I'm sorry I'm not giving you strong academia here, but we've compartmentalized education as this thing that you go and do, in this place that you go and have it. And when, you know, when otherwise you think about learning, learning it should be a lifelong experience. We should be constantly learning and absorbing new knowledge and challenging our assumptions. And so I think that's just, the older I get, that's something that's super interesting to me, where it's like, why is it so boxed if it's such a holistic, lifelong experience? And the best answer I've come up with to this point is was one of the binary points that we gave when we started, which is that it is a function of the institution. It's a function of conditioning. It's a function of, from this grade to this grade to this grade to this grade, you know, in this formal manner, in this formal manner, in this formal manner. Um, it's so that we're conditioned by the time that we leave to kind of formulate our lives and our days according to the cultural structure of the institution, and much less over what we're actually learning about what it means to be a human being on planet Earth, you know.
So kind of indoctrination, or like socialization into the status quo almost.
Yeah, because that continues for a lot of people for the rest of their lives, through whether it be college or whether it be they get a 9 to 5, or or they, what have you. Is just kind of, and I'm not saying it's all bad, I'm just saying that's just the observation, and I think, but I think what, I don't like the word bad, but what I think what is bad is, because that conditioning is so strong, when we're not at school, we don't want to learn. We're less engaged, we're less curious, we're less thoughtful, we're less aware of our experiences, and so much is missed of what could be real learning experiences. um, you know that
So
that that I
what would
think.
the ideal, like, alternative be for you? Because it sounds like you're talking about like an unschooling environment, like a,
Yeah, I don't know, man. The biggest thing I've been wrestling with as I get older, and I'm sure you think about this too, is like, well, okay, well, what would be the first step if that took place? The first step would be that mothers have a more connected, nurturing environment to their children. Well, that's really difficult, because I think maternity leave is like 3 months. I don't know. Like, I've been thinking about this, the older I get and the closer I get towards having children. It's like, who am I going to leave my 90-day baby with? I
yeah.
don't,
Well, in like the United States, unfortunately, like, contrary to all the ideas of American exceptionalism that we learned growing up, like, the United States has much less maternity and paternity leave, parental leave, than many other countries
many,
do.
many other, yeah. Some countries give like 2 years or something. I was doing a little bit of research. I think it was like northern European countries, maybe like Sweden or something. They give like 2 years. Um, so I think it starts like with the ability to actually build a community environment that uh, allows allows for that to take place, man. I don't want to start sounding too like tribal and off the wall, but it's like all of these things kind of perpetuate to what end? And it's like really the end is like to some capitalistic end. That's what it always boils down to, is some capitalistic end at the end of the day. It's like, what if, like just for the sake of, like, not to get too like heebie-jeebie, but just for the sake of contemplating, it's like the older I get, I'm like, what is so wrong with the idea of living in a um, eco-friendly environment that's regenerative with the earth, having a community garden, like what is so wrong with trying to live more, where like the thing was, you don't I don't know, you don't get to go on the I don't know. Travel is the only thing I can validate right now as to why capitalistic ends are really good, because you get access to travel, and travel is really, really important,
But it destroys communities.
Yeah,
It's killing the earth.
that's true.
Which, like, there's a recent climate report that's like, well, I mean, in general, not just. I'm not saying just travel.
Right. So,
There's a lot of
but yeah,
bad
it's
things
like
with it.
if I could paint a perfect world, it would be that we're in a where we operate more often in a state of kind of contentment and peace and resolve, that we have what we need, and we don't need to, we're not fighting for our survival. Um, and from that level, we engage with our environment more calmly and holistically, and we're guided and shepherded by older adults, and we're in community more, and everything is an opportunity for a learning experience.
This
And
is kind of like the dream, the utopia.
yeah, this would be the utopia, yeah. And we're guided through that experience, through care and love and generosity, and what we learn is our education, I guess. That's what we learn, but it's just like, yeah, like that would be the idea. Like I
You're
guess.
talking sort of like taking out the process of going to a building, learning, like well, something I hear you saying almost is that by executing education the way we do, that it's something you go do.
Hmm.
Even if you can, will do homework at home at night, or read books on your own, research anything on the internet, because we have the internet these days. um, Man, side tangent. It's wild that we're of the age that, like, we can remember things like before the internet was really in use, but like students now, they'll never remember that.
Never a clue. And we're young enough where I feel like our generation, this is like so like egotistical, but I feel like our generation is like this golden generation on the planet, where we're like right in the middle. Like we can deeply empathize with what it was like when life was simple and you had no technology, and you know the Game Boy came along, and that shit revolutionized what it meant to play something. uh and we also couldn't live without the internet, and so we advocate for both sides. And I think we have a tremendous moral responsibility to guide the planet with the use of technology, uh,
Mm, amen.
because it's like, if you've never not had it, it's really hard to think about not having it.
Like, it's hard to think of life. Well, this is like without a land, like a telephone of some sort. Like, I can't imagine. So before we had cell phones, we still had a landline, and
Mhm.
it's really hard to imagine life without a landline.
Right.
So I'm trying to like make that a metaphor for if you
Right.
have
And
life.
if you're, especially if you are one of those children who, your parent or your caretaker had a screen in front of your face since the day you were born, it's like you literally, from a, metaphysical, biological level, cannot fathom what it's like to not have that addiction or that connection,
Yeah.
that intimacy, intimacy is a good way to phrase that, that intimacy with technology.
I mean,
So
it's an extension of, like, in anthropology, we talk about technology as an extension of the
mm,
body.
Mm,
And phones are literally extensions of our body in the way that they're
mm,
always on us,
mm,
for so many of us. And I think you're right. Like I'm terrified of what it's going to mean for like infants that handle devices, iPads and whatnot. And like I'm we're going to have research at some point that'll come out
mhm.
like quantifying the impact. I mean, I hope we have that research. But that was all an aside.
Sooner than later.
Um, uh,
Sorry, I keep taking on
well, no.
tangents.
I started that one. What if so what I heard you saying, again, kind of in that anthropological sense, like in anthropology, we talk about, I say we, I'm not I have an undergraduate in
You studied it. No,
anthropology.
that's fair. That's
Yeah.
good. Look, we just talked about the whole point of validation, and through you are a certified anthropologist because that's what the
Oh,
institution sold you. So you better
well,
rep that.
only on the BA level.
Okay.
So I'm a BA anthropologist. Um, uh,
By trade, you can say by trade.
yeah. But one thing we talk about is how like culture influences, or language influences thought,
Mm,
on the very like end of the spectrum, like on the hard understanding, even constrains the way we think about things.
mm,
And so does our like architecture,
mhm,
um, our
mhm,
physical spaces. So um, what I think, what I hear you kind of saying is that the action of going to school, of journeying to school to learn, it like constrains how we think about learning.
mhm,
And we do that from such a young age.
mhm.
Uh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that we do it. We do it from such a young age that we don't. That's what's so interesting about the privileged class in this country that's going through this kind of COVID journey is they're really advocating for how they want their lives to be structured because they
Mm,
don't have to go into a building. They've been surviving without one. Many businesses have gotten rid of their overhead leases and so many different things, right? That are really, and if let's just keep on with the thought we're going, like if a lot of the way school was structured was to kind of condition people into that 9 to 5, it's not this binary, it's not this all inclusive, but we'll just run with this one example. And if that endpoint is changing, how much will that trickle down to, what's going to change for those that are going through a formal education experience? Because yeah, I mean, imagine
mm.
if like it was just like more. There's so many
So you're
points.
saying if the world of work is changing so that more people are working remote permanently,
Mhm.
how does that change? What are the implications for educations? Well, but is that what you're asking?
Yeah, essentially. And that's a long tail. That's a very long tail with many other
Well,
influencing
yeah.
factors. But
Well, because one thing that I pick up on that is that it goes back to that whole, well, I don't think we've used this word, but workforce development is a thought that has come to mind. Like if education is preparing people for work and we're
mhm,
developing a workforce,
right,
um,
right.
I don't know
Well,
what how I was
the
going to finish the
question is
sentence.
the question is what are we working on?
Yeah.
What are we working on? Workforce development, what are we working on?
Oh, that's good.
And
Progress, insatiable progress.
right, and it's like to what end, it's like
Yeah.
there's a few things that are real critical in there, science, but we don't even, as a society, we're not even believing science right now. So half of us don't believe science right now. So what does it matter? Not that what does it matter, but it's like imagine the guy who's like 69 years old right now, who spent the last 50 years studying science, who's at the ground zero of the worst global crisis we've had in 100 years, and no one's believing anything he's saying.
It make you crazy.
It would just be like, what? It's like, so not to say that those things aren't valuable. I just think that ought to tell us to the point of, socialization of all of this is like, what type of human beings are we creating ourselves to be, that we're raising up, where you know, the what do you call that? Essentially, I can't think of the right term, but what you're studying can be really, really important. You know, like I think infrastructure really important. You know, community development. You know, the bioscience is really, really, really important. Um, all of these studies are important, but if it's like if we're just not if we're just not creating a socially healthy society, uh, you know, I don't know. I don't want to say what does it matter because there's still so much value in all of that. And I'm starting to be kind of, what's the right word? I'm starting to kind of think through a negative lens, but because there's so much good also happening and so much. But when you,
But I hear you. There's a lot
yeah,
of like kind of unquestioned assumptions,
mm,
or a lot of sort of keep going because it feels like maybe it's the only thing to do, whereas a different world is possible. Like life doesn't necessarily have to be this way, and we can see that through the history of human existence. We can
yes,
see it modern day, just comparing one country to another. There are very
mm,
different ways of governing.
mm,
Um, and in my head, I'm just thinking of like other quote unquote developed nations that have much larger social safety nets. I mean, we
mm,
talked about parental leave.
mm, mm,
There's different ways of doing this.
mm,
There are places where the 5-day 40-hour work week isn't the norm. There's places you can. It's normal to go home for lunch and a nap in the middle of the day.
right,
I don't know how yeah, anyway, there's places where
all that, yeah,
it's normal to go on vacation for 2 months out of the summer. Like there's a lot there. And I think like something that comes to mind for me that I'm interested in, because I in my day job I do data analytics and have a hand connected to like artificial intelligence, and there's this steady move of we're able to automate more and more tasks, and the way the
mm,
automation rolls out generally, in the majority of cases, it's not that someone's entire job is automated, it's that part of their jobs are automated. And every time
right,
part of someone's job is automated, it means that their employer or companies can get them to do other things,
mm.
and essentially hire fewer people. Um,
And you
but a
would hope
question
that
is
those
like,
would
is
be
it
like,
good?
sorry, go ahead.
Well, the question about kind of progress in education and the way that it's going, like, is the goal, is that actually a goal, so that we could theoretically all have more leisure time? That's something that I had heard in the past.
The
But
automation
certainly,
point?
but that's not what's happening. Like that
No, that's
doesn't
not what happened.
that's not our economic system won't support that, or at least it won't support that presently.
Right. It won't incentivize that.
Yeah. So
Or even
what's the
if
takeaway that you think?
even if it was like to have more higher uh aspirations of what we can then create with our intelligence. Um, even if that was
Mm,
the case, let's say like, you know, we're, we're witnessing the brink of sending human beings to space as a commercial activity. It will soon be a commercial
the
activity.
billionaire space race.
it will it will soon be a commercial activity. You know, in our lifetime, this will be a
I
commercial
mean,
activity.
it is. I think I'd argue it
People have
already
already
is.
bought. Yeah,
Yeah.
it already is. People already bought tickets to do this. So it's like you can hold that argument, right? Like all this automation, acquisition of resources is allowing us as human beings. It's like, sure, but through that mechanism, there's people who work for that company that are homeless, that don't have the health rights, that are in hazardous and unsafe environments. It's like, so yeah, it's just, um, you know, to try and ground us in all this, I think the biggest question that we should be asking that um that then could shape all of these things of what should it look like and are we going somewhere and what should we be learning in this is like it is this making us treat ourselves and each other more as human beings,
That's it.
you know, more as like living breathing human beings, every single person, and I think that that would really ground all of the experiences. Because even, like even inside, let's just take scholarships, for example, or prestigious schools, it's like people are willing to do whatever to get access to the better educational opportunity, as opposed to the educate.
Aunt Becky.
As opposed, you talking about that scandal?
Yeah.
As
Well,
a
that's what I thought you were kind of referring to.
oh no, as opposed to the aspirational experience being, how do we treat each other better, how do we live better together, how do we and like imagine if people were like if that was the tone. There's some people that have that, but if our humanitarian tone was, I'm chasing after making my life and everyone's lives more grounded, and to be filled with more care and love and generosity. And if people were chasing after that as aggressively as they were chasing after these other things, I think we would just intuitively, because we're humans, that we would intuitively know what are the things that we need to be working on and doing and building and developing. But I think most of us aren't tapped into our intuition enough to just stop and think about those questions. And it's just kind of, and that's where I was, to bring this all the way back, like at 21, 22, I was given this privileged opportunity. My graduate school and my PhD were paid for, and I was offered a job. And, like, I found myself receiving privilege and chasing that through these educational means, in which I realized my privilege was the exploitation of someone else. And that was a really hard choice to make, that oftentimes the educational privilege we receive is on the back of the exploitation of someone else.
As I think about how we are propelled ahead as if pushed on some sort of cart we cannot control, I worry that new policies and reforms do not have as a metric of their success that they help us treat each other as human beings. But what if that were the case? Why not make that a condition for success? That any new policy or proposed reform should be measured by the coefficient by which it increases capacity that humans treat each other as whole human beings. Heck yeah, I'm into that. Thank you for listening to this episode of Wide Ruled. Wide Ruled was started at Brainroot Light and Sound. Learn more at brainroot.tv. Wide Ruled's theme music was composed and produced by Dominique Fields. I am Nathaniel Bozarth. Cheers.